Okay, everybody, we've got a lot on today, so there's two things going on. We're here, we're going to have a student presentation from Dr. Cantrell's class, just to give you a sense of what's going on. Please, Lauren, have a seat here. I'll do a little introduction. And then we're integrating you with what we call a practicum for community engagement, and there's a whole lot of different things going on, so it's going to be really quite an interesting session together. Let me welcome you. I don't want to terrify the living daylights out of you, Lauren, but you will be broadcast globally when you're speaking. This is a global conference. It's streamed globally and live. No pressure. So welcome to you all and to the Spiritan communities in particular around the world. This is an academic conference, but part of the Academy is also to be practical, and that's why we've invited our Practicum, Practicum partners coming along in community engagement. But to begin, I want the class experience of Professor Cantrell to lead us, to open the door, to give us your wisdom. So Lauren, off we go. Have we got the slide set up for Lauren? Lauren, your slide's up, so please take 5 minutes.
Thank you. So I wanted to do my research on basically how climate change was going to affect causes of death, and that's a really broad topic to tackle, so I narrowed it down to malaria specifically. So a little bit of background on that. Climate change is going to affect the seasonal and geographical distribution of mosquitoes, the vector for malaria. This is just due to increasing temperatures and changes in rainfall that are going to affect their growth. And the World Health Organization has lots of statistics on malaria, but the one I pulled specifically was from 2019, where 558,000 people died from malaria, and 96% of those cases were in Africa. So we're going to begin seeing increases in trade, climate-induced migration and displacement, and habitat availability for mosquitoes, which will impact every region's malaria burden. So my main thesis and what I wanted to specifically look at was, we know that this burden of malaria is going to increase with climate change. So we want to look at our prevention methods that currently exist and evaluate them both in regions with a current disease burden and regions at risk of an increased burden. So I began researching some of these prevention methods that we currently have. One of the main ones was insecticidal treated nets. And these have been shown to prevent 444 million cases in the past 15 years in Africa. And they cost around $5 to $10 for the original net. And then they need retreated every 6 to 12 months, which costs around 50 cents, which seems like a pretty cheap price to us. But with some people's income in Africa and these developing regions, this may not be as affordable, but no matter what, the cost of getting a disease is going to be outweighed by getting these nets to be able to prevent malaria. Another prevention method was indoor residual spraying, which protected approximately 106 million people from malaria in 2015. And then a final approach that has become more modern is genetic modifications of mosquitoes to affect the reproduction and the resistance to malaria and developing it and then spreading it, which has become a lot more feasible in recent years with the advent of CRISPR technology. And this kind of brings me into my conclusion and some patterns that I was seeing when I was doing my research. Genetic modifications may be more available in regions like the United States, more developed regions, and maybe not as available or implemented in these developing regions like Africa. So there are going to be shortfalls and inequities in the prevention methods, and they will continue to exist. So research is needed to determine which measures will work best on a per region basis and make sure that they're equitable. And evidence-based methods are best approaches when quality and the recipients are taken into consideration, which brings me to my last bullet point, that these methods need to be ecologically, culturally, economically, and scientifically sound so that we can take both quality and the recipients into mind. Thank you.
Lauren, that was beautiful. That was a lovely presentation. And let me tell you, as you can see, we've had chairs here all day, 10 chairs. Often this table's been full during the other classroom sessions. So Lauren, you're the final presentation of our conference. Congratulations. And I want to engage you in a little conversation. But we decided, because it's later in the afternoon, that we'd combine this session, this class session, with from the practical point of view of many of the community engaged practices. So we're going to keep you interested that way. But let me ask you, Lauren, we've got a simple question for you. If there's one single takeaway from what you've studied here, this is a beautiful slide, a lot of research, a lot of work. So thank you. What would be the one takeaway?
I think the main takeaway is that we have prevention methods and we have means of preventing deaths and prevalence and incident cases of malaria, but we need to make sure that these are well researched in their effectiveness and their equity so that everyone has access to them as malaria cases begin to increase.
All right, tables. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Talk to each other about that outcome. What do you think? What has Lauren inspired you to think about malaria and climate change? And then we'll get you to ask a question or two of Lauren. So take just 2 minutes to talk to each other about Lauren's presentation.
Hi, I liked your presentation, Lauren. My question was, with the indoor residual spraying, can that also go outside into the atmosphere and then affect climate change with the ozone and stuff like that, if you understand?
Yeah, that was a lot of secondary research to what I did, but there's always that balance that you want to take of, okay, we're preventing something bad for human health, but also taking in, like I said in my last bullet point in my conclusion, taking in those ecological considerations. So yeah, like DDT, whenever that was around, that obviously helped with malaria, but that also caused so many secondary issues in the environment, such as getting rid of birds of prey. So we had a decline in the bald eagle population, which is thankfully regenerating now that we're not spraying DDT everywhere. So there was a lot of research on the effects of what these indoor residual sprays. I'm honestly not aware of the actual chemical composition and the secondary effects of these specifically, but when you think about spraying anything into the environment, there has to be something else going on. So I would say things like the insecticidal treated nets are a little bit more better because it's not an aerosol going on into the environment.
Very perceptive question, thank you. Any other comments? We have a question here. Thank you.
So I was just wondering, in a very general sense, are there any new angles that you're aware of that are being pursued, any new lines of research that people are looking into, in addition to this stuff? Because I know you were saying, this stuff needs to be funded and researched more, but are you aware of anything happening right now that we're trying to push forward?
So a lot of the research is actually in genetic modifications. There is talk about vaccines or different treatment methods, but that's where mainly the focus is right now. I would say is genetic modifications, just because of, with CRISPR, the gene editing technique, it's, again, we have to take into ecological considerations that if we're affecting mosquitoes and how they act, how we're going to infect the environment then, the food chain and other predators if we start affecting mosquitoes. So there's a lot of not only research in the methods themselves on whether or not they work, but their secondary effects.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's great. You know about CRISPR. My goodness gracious me. I am teaching my doctoral class on genetics, and I'm talking about CRISPR in that class. We have had the past 2 sessions talking about gene editing as part of climate change. So you're right on the money on this final one with mosquitoes. The gene editing is going to be a big one. So thank you very, very much, Lauren, for this presentation. Please go back and take your chair. A special applause, not just for Lauren, but as being the last presentation. Thanks, Lauren. So we're going to go into the practicum now for multiple sessions, a little hopscotch. We'll do a sort of Scottish Cayley, doing a little bit of this and that, moving around fast. And we're going to begin with Lucy Jo DiMaggio to come up and just tell us a quick word about what community engagement at the university deals with.
Hi, y'all. How's everybody today? Sleepy. Thanks, Dan. There's cookies and juice, so everybody should get a little sugar. That's to you guys over here that see finals bearing down them in April. It's gonna be okay. Get a week and then Easter, and then you get into it. So my name's Lucy Jo DiMaggio. I have a couple roles here at the university. I'm the director for mission animation. I'm also the coordinator for co-curricular community engagement, which might sound like a weird pairing, but all of our community engagement here at the university, regardless of where it comes from, is mission driven. All of our community engagement, whether it's out of the classroom, whether it's out of a club, whether it's something in between, all comes out of the spirit and idea of going out to the margins and walking with others. We don't serve at people at the university, we walk with others to help solve the world's injustices together. So that's sort of how I ended up in those two blended roles. And I'm actually here today as a fill-in for the AVP for Community Engagement, but I am gonna very briefly tell you about the ways in which we serve here at the university in case you're not familiar or you're only familiar with maybe one or two. So community engagement happens in three basic ways at the university. We have curricular community engagement, we have co-curricular community engagement, and we have extracurricular community engagement. So extracurricular community engagement, which I would guess, I bet there's a bunch of people over here in the student section over here that do that. That's anything you might do that's, say, associated with your sorority, or maybe your floor collects money at Christmas time for something. Maybe you guys do a toy drive. Maybe you all got together as a club and went to a soup kitchen or a food bank to help out. That's something that exists outside of the classroom with no educational components tied to it, extracurricular. Then we have curricular community engagement, which is a lot of what CEDAR does. If you're not familiar with them, that's the Center for Community Engaged Teaching and Research. There's a table in the back of faculty that are probably ready to roll their eyes because they've been doing CEDAR work for a really long time, but we're educating everybody today. So CEDAR does a lot of the community engaged learning courses or the CEL courses. If you've ever taken those or seen those, or if you're a community partner that is paired with those are students in a classroom, in a credit-bearing class that are also doing community engagement as a part of the course. So it's blended together with the course. They're doing meaningful reflection on that within the course, and it's tied into the content and often their major, depending on the assignment. Then there's co-curricular community engagement, and that's what I do, so I think that's the really cool blended one. Co-curricular is outside the classroom but has educational components. And I've got Evergreen up front, so I'm going to use them as an example because they're a great example of a student organization. They're just a registered student organization, they're a club, and they do community engagement, but they also have educational components. So they do cleanups and they do plantings, but if you go, promo, to their tree planting on the 30th, you might also learn why, say, as a campus, we're applying for Arboretum status. And you might learn why that's even important on an urban campus. They also host speakers throughout the year from the community organizations we work with to help our students understand outside the classroom why this work is important. So it's not just, hey, we have to go to the south side and clean up because there's trash. It's, hey, what does it mean to be a part of a community and be living as a student often in this community where there are residents that have lived for 40, 50, 60 years? And what does that look like? So those are the basic three spheres that we do community engagement. It comes out of just about every division, certainly out of academics, certainly out of student life, and certainly out of mission identity. But you could almost look at every single division and find little pockets, even within staff, of community engagement happening on campus. If you have any questions, I'll hang around for a little bit, but I would much rather you guys spend your time at all the lovely tables we have out here. Definitely check out Evergreen if you're a student. They've got a lot of cool stuff coming up that makes for a great study break in the next couple of weeks. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Lucy Jo. Thanks for your leadership and for your spirit and vision that inspires us at the university.